The words we might find in chapter 5, las guayabas, like emerged, means to come out of, to appear. Rafters are beams in a high ceiling. Departure is leaving. Reluctantly is when someone doesn't want to do something. Renegades are people who reject normal behavior. They don't follow the law, they're unlawful. Mesmerized, sometimes like hypnotized, is a synonym. Doting means showing excessive attention. Privileged, it means a synonym is advantages. Jostled means to be bumped or pushed around. In chapter 5, Las Guayabas, we're going to be hearing about Zacatecas, the map of Aguascalientes, where she was living on her ranch, the path they probably might be taking to Zacatecas. Because remember, now they're leaving and escaping to go to the United States. Las Guayabas. They emerged from the fig orchard and continued through a pear grove. When they came into a clearing, they saw Señor Rodriguez waiting with a lantern by the barn doors. They hurried inside. Pigeons fluttered in the rafters. The wagon was waiting, surrounded by crates of green guavas. Did Marisol come? Asked Esperanza, her eyes searching the barn. I could tell no one about your departure, said Señor Rodriguez. When the time is right, I will tell her that you looked for her and said goodbye. Now, we must hurry. You need the protection of darkness. Alfonso Miguel and Señor Rodriguez had built another floor in the wagon, higher than the real one, and open at the back, with barely enough room between for Mamá, Esperanza, and Hortensia to lie down. Hortensia lined it with blankets. Esperanza had known about the plan, but now she hesitated when she saw the small space. Please, can I sit with Alfonso and Miguel? Mija, it is necessary, said Mamá. There are too many bandits, said Alfonso. It is not safe for women to be on the roads at night. Besides, your uncles have many spies. Remember, that is why we must take the wagon to Zacatecas and catch the train there instead of from Aguascalientes. Luis had bragged about the engagement to everyone, said Hortensia. Think how angry he will be when he discovers you have gone. We cannot take the chance of you being seen. Mamá and Hortensia said grateful goodbyes to Señor Rodriguez, then slid between the floors of the wagon. Esperanza reluctantly scooted on her back between them. When can we get out? Every few hours we will stop and stretch, said Mamá. Esperanza stared at the wood planks just a few inches from her face. She could hear Alfonso Miguel and Señor Rodriguez dumping crate after crate of guavas onto the floor above them, the almost ripe fruit rolling and tumbling as it was piled on. The guava smelled fresh and sweet, like pears and oranges all in one. Then she felt the guavas roll in around her feet as Alfonso and Miguel covered the opening. If anyone saw the wagon on the road, it would look like a farmer and his son taking a load of fruit to market. How are you? Alfonso asked, sounding far away. We are fine, called Hortensia. The wagon pulled out of the barn and the guavas shifted, then settled. It was dark inside and it felt like someone was rocking them in a bumpy cradle, sometimes side to side and sometimes back and forth. Esperanza began to feel frightened. She knew that with a few kicks of her feet, she could get out, but still she felt trapped. Suddenly she thought she couldn't breathe. Mama, she said, gasping for air. Right here, Esperanza. Everything is fine. Do you remember, said Hortensia, taking her hand, when you were only 5 years old and we hid from the thieves? You were so brave for such a little girl. Your parents and Alfonso and the other servants had gone to town. It was just you and me and Miguel in the house. We were in your bedroom and I was pinning the hem of your beautiful blue silk dress. Do you remember that dress? You wanted it pinned higher so your new shoes would show. Esperanza's eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness and to the pitch and roll of the wagon. Miguel ran into the house because he had seen bandits, said Esperanza, exhaling. She remembered standing on a chair with her arms outstretched like a bird ready for flight, while Hortensia fitted the sides of the dress. And she remembered the new shoes, shiny and black. Yes, said Hortensia. I looked out the window to see 6 men, their faces covered with handkerchiefs, and they all held rifles. They were renegades who thought they had permission to steal from the rich and give to the poor. But they didn't always give to the poor, and they sometimes killed innocent people. We hid under the bed, said Esperanza, and we pulled down the bed cover so they couldn't see us. She remembered staring straight up at the bedboards, much like the boards enclosing them in the wagon. Now, she took another long breath. What we didn't know was that Miguel had a big field mouse in his pocket, said Hortensia. Yes, he was going to scare me with it, said Esperanza. The wagon creaked and swayed. They could hear Alfonso and Miguel murmuring above them. The persistent smell of the guavas filled their noses. Esperanza relaxed a little. Hortensia continued. The men came into the house and we could hear them opening cupboards and stealing the silver. Then we heard them climb the stairs. 2 men came into the bedroom and we saw their big boots through a crack in the bed cover, but we didn't say a word until a pin poked me and I moved my leg and made a noise. I was so frightened they would find us, said Hortensia, but Miguel pushed the mouse out from under the bed and it ran around the room. The men were startled, but started laughing, and then one of them said, It is just a raton. We've got plenty. Let's go. And they left, said Esperanza. Mama said, They took almost all of the silver, but Papa and I only cared that all of you were safe. Do you remember how Papa said that Miguel was very smart and brave and asked him what he wanted for protecting you? His most prized possession. Esperanza remembered. Miguel wanted to go on a train ride. Hortensia started to hum softly, and Mama held Esperanza's hand. Miguel's reward, that day-long train ride to Zacatecas, seemed like yesterday. Miguel had been 8 and Esperanza 5. She wore the beautiful blue silk dress and could still see Miguel standing at the station, wearing a bow tie and practically shining, as if Hortensia had cleaned and starched his entire body. Even his hair was slicked down smooth, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. He was mesmerized by the locomotive, watching it slowly pull in. Esperanza had been excited too.
They're like really. He's like. So when she was talking about that story, he was 8 and she was 5.
Yes.
So they're pretty far apart from their age.
So they're 3 years apart. When the train arrived, all sputtering and blustery, porters had hurried to escort them, showing them the way to their car. Papa took her hand and Miguel's, and they boarded, waving goodbye to Alfonso and Hortensia. The compartment had seats of soft leather, and she and Miguel had bounced happily upon them. Later, they ate in the dining car at little tables covered in white linens and set with silver and crystal. When the waiter came and asked if there was anything he could bring them, Esperanza said, Yes, please bring lunch now. The men and the women dressed in their hats and fancy clothes smiled and chuckled at what must have looked like a doting father and 2 privileged children. When they arrived in Zacatecas, a woman wrapped in a colorful rebozo, a blanket shawl, boarded the train selling mangos on a stick. The mangoes were peeled and carved to look like exotic flowers. Papa bought one for each of them. On the return ride, she and Miguel, with their noses pressed against the window and their hands still sticky from the fresh mango, had waved to every person they saw. The wagon jostled them now as it hit a hole in the road. Esperanza wished she could get to Zacatecas as fast as she had that day on the train, instead of traveling on back roads hidden in a slow wagon. But this time, she was buried beneath a mountain of guavas and could not wave to anyone. There was no comfort, and there was no papa. Esperanza stood at the station in Zacatecas, tugging at the second-hand dress. It didn't fit properly and was the most awful yellow. And even though they had been out of the wagon for some hours, she still smelled like guavas. It had taken them 2 days to arrive in Zacatecas, but finally that morning they left the wagon hidden in a thicket of shrubs and trees and walked into town. After the discomfort of the wagon, she was looking forward to the train. The locomotive arrived, pulling a line of cars and hissing and spewing steam. But they did not board the fancy car with the compartments and leather seats or the dining car with the white linens. Instead, Alfonso led them to a car with rows of wooden benches, like church pews facing each other, already crowded with peasants. Trash littered the floor, and it reeked of rotting fruit and urine. A man with a small goat on his lap grinned at Esperanza, revealing no teeth. 3 barefoot children, 2 boys and a girl, crowded near their mother. Their legs were chalky with dust, their clothes were in tatters, and their hair was grimy. An old, frail beggar woman pushed by them to the back of the car, clutching a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Her hand was outstretched for alms. Esperanza had never been so close to so many peasants before. When she went to school, all of her friends were like her. When she went to town, she was escorted and hurried around any beggars. And the peasants always kept their distance. That was simply the way it was. She couldn't help but wonder if they would steal her things. Mama, said Esperanza, stopping in the doorway, we cannot travel in this car. It is not clean, and the people do not look trustworthy. Esperanza saw Miguel frown as he edged around her to sit down. Mama took her hand and guided her to an empty bench.
That was kind of mean what she said, because he's one of them.
Mama took her hand and guided her to an empty bench where Esperanza slid over next to the window. Papa would never have had us sit here, and Abuelita wouldn't approve, she said stubbornly. Mija, it is all we can afford, said Mama. We must make do. It is not easy for me either, but remember, we're going to a place that will be better than living with Tío Luis, and at least we will be together. The train pulled out and settled into a steady motion. Hortensia and Mama took out the crocheting. Mama was using a small hook and white cotton thread to make carpetas, lace doilies to put under a lamp or a vase. She held up her work to Esperanza and smiled. Would you like to learn? Esperanza shook her head. Why did Mama bother crocheting lace? They had no vases or lamparas to put on top of them. Esperanza leaned her head against the window. She knew she did not belong here. She was Esperanza Ortega from El Rancho de las Rosas. She crossed her arms tight and stared out the window.